Hello, I'm Rob Doherty and this is the FSTVS podcast, Executive Edition, supported by Liberary Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, Animation Consultant for Film London. In this series we'll be chatting to the big hitters in the animation industry and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and, I hope, get to meet the person behind that executive title. Today's special guest is Ramsay McBean, who recently exec produced one of the biggest animated film hits of the past few years, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem. Not only that, but he's also worked on hits like SpongeBob, Sponge on the Run, Sherlock, Gnomes, and the Paw Patrol movie. Born in Thailand and having lived all over the world from Barbados to the US to Scotland, Ramsay brings a unique global perspective to the world of animation. We'll be diving into how those cross-cultural experiences have shaped his storytelling, his passion for mentoring new talent, favourite pizza toppings, and what's next in the world of animation. So sit back, relax, and get ready to hear from one of the industry's leading producers, Ramsay McBean.
Ramsay, welcome to the FSTVS Executive Sessions podcast. Now, you're a film producer, especially in animated feature films, and to back that statement up, your recent credits include exec producing one of the best reviewed movies of 2023, which was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem for Nickelodeon Paramount, and that achieved a box office grossing over $180 million globally and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 96%. Before that, as an executive producer of Micros Animation, you worked on Sherlock, Gnomes, SpongeBob, Sponge on the Run, and the Paw Patrol movie. That's pretty impressive track record of very successful movies.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are involved in making any of these animated movies. So it's been great to be lucky enough to be a part of them as they happen. But I think like I was thinking about this because it's like on a big movie, you have like 25,000 artist weeks to make a big animated film, which is 480 years if one person were to do it. So I don't think that any single person can take any credit for these things. They're a huge collaborative thing, and in each of those movies I played a different part, but it's been very enjoyable to be, and I feel very fortunate to get that chance.
Cool. And out of those, you said 480 years?
Yes, yeah.
So how many of those years were yours?
3. 2. I mean, it's like 2 per movie, 2 or 3. A single person could only do so much in that amount of time, right? So, it's actually on Turtles, 2 years, actually, because it was already a year in production by the time I joined it. So
why did you join it a year in?
Because it was Turtles had started. They kind of got started in the middle of COVID, or COVID happened, and I was working at Micros, and as a part of the process of these films, you find your partner vendor studio when you're a company like Paramount, because they don't own an animation studio. So what they do is they go out to various different vendors and they get them to do tests, and they meet the team, and they kind of do a sense check of like who the right partner would be. And so my job at Micros at the time was essentially running those tests and trying to build those partnerships with studios. And in doing that, I met the Turtles team, and I was a big Turtles fan, and we were all similar ages. And, it was my number one priority in that role at Micros to make sure Micros made that movie, because I had to make a Ninja Turtles movie. It was my number one franchise as a kid growing up. So at some point in the middle of all of that, they the leadership of Paramount and Nickelodeon thought, well, we don't have like an animation producer on our side. We've got Point Grey, but we don't quite have our animation experience person. And this guy from London gets along with the team. And if he's willing to work hours, LA hours, it's COVID. So nobody's in a studio, nobody's in an office anyway. Everybody was remote for the whole first year of Turtles. So it was it was just a very, very lucky opportunity for me, really, in that sense. And I got offered the job to join the team itself and help them make the whole movie. And honestly, like, COVID was such a horrific time for so many people, and it was such a, it's still got its ramifications now, but in that moment, it changed the way people thought about work. It changed the way people thought about remote working, and I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time for that to work for me.
Cool. And it would have been very rude to say no, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, I woke up to the text message saying, like, would you like to do this? And like, it didn't take me very long to make up my mind. I was immediately, it was always it's so hard when you don't live in the US to get to work on the front end of a movie. And by front end, I mean like the producer client side, where the actual filmmakers are working, as opposed to being on the vendor side, where you're basically receiving the material and then, creating it. So it was just a rare opportunity. And there's a couple of places here that you get to do that, but not necessarily on a big movie like Turtles.
No, sure. And you mentioned, when you obviously very passionate about the franchise, and you said it was some franchise you're very passionate about when you were younger. Yeah. You had quite an interesting sort of childhood, I guess. Being born in Thailand and growing up in different countries like Barbados, the US, and Scotland, down to your dad's job. What shows resonated with you most as you grew up? And do you think that sort of cross-cultural influence has played a part in your career in animation? Turtles aside.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you have the big franchises like Turtles that I think any child born that was my age at some point, you couldn't avoid Turtles at that point in the early 90s. It was so prevalent. It was like a global phenomenon. But I think a lot of the content I was watching, even though I was living in different countries, was still very like sort of mainstream, I would say, in that sense. My grandparents used to record British television and then send us cassette tapes of VHSs of British television so that we understood our British culture. Because although I don't sound it, I am actually Scottish and English, and I have a British passport. So like we would get Gladiators on VHS, and we would all sit and watch Gladiators or something, or Postman Pat or anything like that. And I guess in one of those was like the movie Watership Down, which was a movie I was very obsessed with, probably because it scared me so much as a child. It was such a big influence on me early on, and I think a lot of people I know that end up working in movies end up watching movies that are probably a little bit aged up for them at a young age, and that's why like the power of cinema becomes very prevalent to them very early in their lives. They're like, I watched Jaws way too young, but that movie, and that it became a thing to me that like movies can do this. Movies are a thing that can tell a great story and captivate you in an interesting way.
And are you still afraid to go in the water?
Well, I lived on an island in the Caribbean when I watched Jaws, so just imagine that. I was in the sea every single day, which is part of the thing that was so influential about that. But yeah, obviously, no, I love the sea. It's like it's one of those things that your fears become your obsessions, I guess.
Interesting. Now you, as we mentioned before, you lived in all sorts of places as you were growing up. And do you think any of those cultural influences that you're exposed to as you travelled the world influenced your choice of stories now? I mean, I know there's one project, Voices of the Forest, which is a real passion project of yours.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of directly and indirectly influence things, because I think like the number one thing that you take for granted when you grow up in different cultures and among different communities is that you learn when you get older, you realize that people are just people, and a lot of people want the same things, and a lot of people, all of the things that people talk about dividing humanity are actually, they're very similar in various countries. Like, like people all just want to provide for their families. They want to be safe. They want to do all these things. And that is no matter what religion, cultural background, whatever, there's like some very, very common things that are, no matter who you interact with, people kind of want the same thing, and ultimately are very kind people. Like, a vast majority of the world are good people. And I think that like learning that and experiencing that and being able to then talk to people from various different backgrounds helps me in my job, because my job, I'm not an artist. I don't draw. I don't have any of those skills, but what I do have is an ability to talk and communicate to people and understand what their motivations are and try and get the most out of them. And those people will come from various different cultural backgrounds, and I think trying to get people to work together and collaborate together in a constructive and positive way is kind of like one of the key parts of a producer's job. So from that standpoint, sort of like, I guess my childhood and is influenced it that way. But in terms of like projects and stories that I want to tell, like I think certainly like movies like Ozzy are an opportunity to do something different with animation, in the sense of like trying to make something that can tell a story that's very meaningful and also have direct links to various charities. Like the movie is all about orangutans in Sumatra, and it's connected. The other producers have done an amazing job in connecting the actual film's revenue to very meaningful charities. And so like as the film generates income, that money is then distributed to those charities. So that was like a really big thing to try and do. And of course, it's an independent movie. It's not a big studio movie, so it has its challenges in making it. But like, we put that together when I was at Mikros, and like the team at Mikros poured their heart and souls into it to make it great, because the artists actually got to work on something they truly believed in the message, and that really increased the quality of the film on screen, because people cared about what they were making as opposed to something that's more commercially based.
And it sounds like you didn't have any real problem in convincing Mikros it was a good movie to make, even though a chunk of the upside was going away to charities.
No, I think everybody, at the time, everybody understood that it was a movie that was worth doing, and the investors and producers were so passionate about it, and we had an idea of how we could put it together, and we pursued that, and I think. The independent movies, it's very different. It's a very different skill set than making the studio movies. And I think at that point, I hadn't made Turtles. I hadn't experienced what it was like to be on the bigger studio machine. But now, in retrospect, you can understand the difference between the two, and sort of where both worlds can learn from each other in the way they make the films. But with Ozzy, it was kind of a no-brainer for a lot of us, just because we believed in the message, we believed in what it could be, and we wanted to attempt to make something that was going to change the way people thought about animation, because we always thought that families care about these subjects now, and like if every cinema ticket that was bought, it ended up going to save an orangutan, then what a great thing to do, because that species is under serious threat, and there's so much deforestation happening in that part of the world that it's a real challenging thing for the people on the ground. And we learn a lot by talking to the people on the ground who are actually doing this work every day.
No, sure. So I have to confess I haven't seen it, but it's going to go on my list now. It sounds like a great movie.
Yeah, I think it comes out this week, I believe. Yeah.
Now, you're from just listening to you there, you're very passionate about things that are important to you. And I know you're a very strong supporter of industry-specific training and mentoring new talent. And I know that in a previous role, you were very keen to try and establish a studio in London with an associated academy. What was driving that? And sort of a subsequent question to that is, why do you think that studio-run training schemes or academies are important to animation, especially features?
Well, I think I've been fortunate enough to work in lots of different countries, and every country has its advantages and disadvantages to where you do the work and how you do the work. And you when you're putting together these films now, some of the films are made in like 5 different countries speaking 3 different languages as their first language, and so when you're piecing together everything, you use the tax credits as a part, you use the skill set as a part, and you use the cost as a part. And those factors all matter. And I think like at the highest level, the tax credits obviously make a big difference. But the equally as important thing is, do they have the talent to actually make the project happen and do it at that highest level? And I think from being a part of like movies that range from very sort of lower budgets that are almost like straight to DVD or straight to streaming projects compared to like the big theatricals, the difference between getting the quality to like 70% of those big things to 80% to 90% to then like the final 5%. The final 5% is the hardest thing to get to, because I think a lot of people don't really see. It's hard to get the talent that can see the note and see the change and see the subtlety that you need to get to be able to get the image or the animation or the camera to being that final thing. And I think that comes from the only way to get a talent pool that have that experience is to offer them mentorship and training at a really young age and give them the ability to work alongside people who know that and understand that. And it's not necessarily something you can learn in a school so much. It's something that you can learn on the job. And I think that we were really trying to set up a system in the UK that would allow more feature films to come through here. And I'm very glad that now that's starting to happen more and more, especially with the new tax credit stuff that's happening. But, I think I was very fortunate very, very early in my career to have mentors that helped me and guided me in my career. And without them, there's no way I would be sitting here and doing the things I'm doing. And so, when I speak to most people in the industry, almost everybody who's successful has had that person that's been like, I will help you get to this next stage. It's not something that just happens by accident. You can have a natural talent, you can have a natural drive, but at some point, those two things introduce you to a human being that will take you under their wing, and they will get you from that 70% to that 95% to that 100%. And I think that the more we can work together as an industry here to cultivate that type of environment for younger people, then the more strength we will have. And ultimately, the next generation is the one that will come through with their own stories and have their own passions and have their own reinvention of the industry in some way. So, keeping an eye on young talent is super important, I think.
And how, you said you very, very fortunate to have a mentor earlier in your career. It's a slightly odd question, I suppose, but how do you find a mentor? Is it just something like any strong relationship, you just bond or you just gel or whatever it is?
I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the challenges with the film industry is that it's so hard to do that unless you already have some connection into the film industry. And in my case, my dad, he didn't work in animation, but he worked for UNICEF, and he worked with UNICEF collaborating with major studios like Disney and Warner Brothers and Nickelodeon in the 90s. And because of that connection, he knew people in the business. And there was a guy called Max Howard who worked with my dad, who I basically emailed and said, help me help you, I think, when I was at university. And he was like, you can come to LA if you want. And I was like, great, I'll do that. And then after that experience, I kind of just said to him, look, I'll just work for you for free. Just let me follow you around and I'll do anything. Just let me be in the room. And that was kind of the beginning of it. But it took as much as that opportunity was there for me, it took me to be proactive in taking these opportunities and, and jumping in there and being able to luckily be in a position where I did not have very much money at all, because I was not necessarily getting paid very much at the time, but I was able to be in the room and learn. And that eventually, got me my first job. And then that eventually got me my second job. That first job got me my second job. And then that led to other things. So, I think that there's one thing about knowing people that helps, but I think there's also great schemes like the Film London mentorship scheme and things like that now, I'm trying to find people that don't know anybody in the business and try and be that person for them now, because I know how hard it is when you don't have that anchor point. And it's easy to help your mate's son or daughter. It's like that's a very common thing in the film industry. So I'm trying to expand that net to people who maybe don't have that access.
That's great. I mean, that's actually fun enough. You just answered my next question, which was if you're not fortunate enough to have a connection in the industry somehow, how do you find those connections? And I think, a lot of that is about networking, if you can, and being in places and going to places where like-minded studio bosses and animators and people who are a few rungs above you in the system are. And then trying to make, without being too stalkery, trying to make connections with them.
Yeah, and I think you'd be surprised at how many people want to be in the film business and that I've spoken to and been like, cool, yeah, reach out to me, message me on LinkedIn. I always try and give people time. And I would say of the amount of people that speak to me to the amount of messages I would get, I think 1% of the people actually do send the email, actually do the message, or we have the meeting and then I say, okay, go and think about these things and follow up. And then they never follow up. It's amazing. It takes a very specific type of person, I think, because of how much rejection there is in the business and how hard it is and how challenging it is. And I think probably the most, informative thing to happen to me at a very young age, like when I went to this work placement in LA when I was probably 20, was that I went there and I realized that all these people that have names on posters are just people. They're not anything else. When they were 20, they didn't know they were going to get their name on a poster. They're just human beings, and they just found a way to do that. And I think the lack of fear of oh, well, how can I do that? No, they're this, they're that. It's no, they're just people and you're just a person. And if you work hard enough and you try and learn enough and, focus the beginning part of your career on putting yourself in situations where you're going to learn, as opposed to being picky about oh, I only want to work on this type of film, or I only want to do that type of project or anything like that. I think that you can broaden your education yourself in a way that you can leapfrog some of these people that maybe are very specific and are only oh, well, I only want to work on big movies, so therefore I'm only going to do this. It's sometimes taking the bigger job on the smaller movie is going to educate you more than taking the smaller job on the bigger movie, and I think that in my career, I've bounced back and forth between those types of things, and that allowed me to, by the time I was working with big studio people, I kind of had a very unique perspective on a lot of things.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's I'm personally don't produce things myself, as much as I used to. But in terms of meetings, I always feel there's no such thing as a wasted meeting. You get, so even if it's no, I don't like your project, go away. You learn something from that. If you're open-minded enough, you can always take something away from any kind of meeting, even any kind of rejection, if you understand why it is. Mm-hmm. Currently, you mentioned earlier about being prepared to work on LA times, and you divide your time between the UK and Los Angeles. I'm assuming that's driven by the work split on the films. Is that right?
It's really just, I mean, it's driven by turtles essentially. When COVID finished and, people were allowed back in the office, I obviously flew out there and was supporting the film from London on the first movie. But in the second, when we decided that I would move from being an executive producer to being a producer on the sequel, that comes with a lot more on the ground time. So I've got a visa and I jump back and forth between the two countries now. But when I'm in the UK, I start work at like 5 p.m. and like last night I finished at 1 a.m. And then when I'm in LA, I'll fly out there and sometimes spend like 6 weeks with the team over there and then come back and see my family here and jump back and forth like that. So, I think I tend to know in the movie schedule already when I need to be there based on just milestones of like, oh, we're finishing animation here, we're starting animation there, we're doing that stuff. So my time's really split for now between here and LA. But of course, as we go into production, I'll be at the vendors. I'll have to go to the different countries that the vendors are in. I kind of go to wherever the film needs me in that moment. And yeah, I mean, I think, it's just Turtles really drives it. I work the LA day, and when I'm in LA, I do the LA day, and when I'm in London, I do the LA day.
So do you get to play golf during the day or something like that when you're in London?
No, I don't. I should really be practicing some sort of sport that's functional for me in my later life. But I just spend time with my daughter. To be honest, I kind of enjoy the London work cycle because most people work, especially in film, you're probably leaving your house at 8 a.m. and you're probably not getting home till 8 p.m. because you don't finish in the office till 7 or 8 p.m. And then you sit in front of a TV for 2 hours and then you go to bed at like 10 or 11 and then that's it. Whereas, sure, I go to sleep late and I wake up, but then I have a whole day of sunshine and like daylight to do things and go and, and that's a very different work-life balance. Actually, I kind of do 2 days in one because I have a day and then I have a work day, which is a little bit crazy, but at the same time, like it is a different way of working that actually I've enjoyed because I've got a young daughter and so I get to spend a lot more time with her.
That sounds perfect.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Liberi Consulting. Liberi offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at libericonsulting.com. That's LIBERI consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
You were talking earlier on about a movie being made by, possibly 5 different countries. But this, what you're doing now is primarily, I think, sort of US, UK. What do you think the relative strengths and possibly weaknesses are in the feature industry on either side of the Atlantic?
I mean, the UK is kind of hard for me because although I live here and I produce from here, I haven't actually worked for a UK company now for like probably 6 or 7 years. Because I worked for Micros, which was primarily a French company that did animation there, and then in Montreal, and then I've been mostly in LA since then. But I think that the big difference is between the two is just the US studio system and how the front end is operated there and like the importance they put on certain disciplines over there and just the education of the talent over there. Like, Cal Arts graduates are incredibly talented storytellers and they come out every year and you've got these young people with energy and excitement to create their own things, and they're also there's years and years and years of graduates of those schools, and and then on the flip side there's a university called Art Center over there that like visual development, like a lot of people in visual development come from Art Center, and they it's not to say that there aren't schools other than those two. There's a lot of super talented people that didn't come from those two schools, but I think like just from a foundational standpoint, like the front end talent that exists there in story and in art is really, really strong. And really like immediately people then get mentorship when they come into the industry. They have other people that they know from school that help them get jobs. Like there's a real culture of helping each other get places on movies. And then the other probably big thing is like editorial is approached very differently over there. Obviously, you have such a breadth of editors that work in the industry in LA that like, you know, and editing is the heart of any of these movies. So like, it's hard to imagine where like a director and editor can be set up where LA is not their hub, just because that's where a lot of the directorial talent is and a lot of the editorial talent is. But in the UK, I think there's a lot of ambition to do more stuff here. There's a lot of studios exploring some of that work here. There's obviously studios like Locksmith where they are doing that work here that are doing it at a high level. So, you know, I think especially with the new tax credits and with more and more people thinking like that, there's a big opportunity for the UK to be a hub for being like a creation hub as opposed to just a vendor hub, which is kind of the history here is more built in VFX vendor work back from like Harry Potter days and building out the VFX industry and everything. And like more recently, the animation industry here has been getting larger. But like, I would really love to be able to do some of the work that I do in LA in the UK more, you know, as my career goes on, just because I feel like there's an opportunity to tell unique stories and utilize the tax credits as well. Yeah.
And so is it sort of primarily the front end that you think needs to be developed more here in the UK?
I think so. I mean, I think like there's obviously from a CG like university educational experience, I think there's always room for improvement in that world. And I think like doing some sort of studio academy where you can kind of bridge some people out of university. You know, I think like a lot of the work I've done is in France, and, you know, they spent 5 years at animation school over there. So they had 2 more years of training at a school before they come out and are in the workforce. So in the UK, it's typically 3 years. So it's very hard to like try and compare those two things. And I think in VFX, it's different because I think like it's a different type of pipeline and your target is a different thing. Whereas in animation, a lot of what the new generation of movie is asking for is a lot of creation and a unique perspective from even a vendor studio. Like, how do we, like, when you look at the stylization of like Nimona or Turtles or Spider-Verse or any of these films, like they're really leaning on the vendor studio to like be creative and actually come up with ideas of how this thing's going to look. And it can't look like something else. And I think, in VFX to a certain extent, like you want something to look real and that's your target, and everything that's real looks real and it looks like something that's real. Whereas in animation, it's like a cup can look like anything. Like it can have a different design language, it can have a different modeling, it can have all these different things. So like, that's where I think more of the artistic training on the side of the training could be more useful here, because certainly when I work with French artists or something like that, they've got such a breadth of knowledge in traditional 2D animation or painting or things like that is like puts them on a very interesting level to collaborate with. And I think like there is that talent here. It's just like the amount of that talent, I guess, is like the big difference, just because there's not all these schools creating that, you know.
No, sure. And you've mentioned this a couple of times about how powerful animation can be, and it's and I think you once said it can create timeless stories that are important for our children to engage with in a positive way. I'm right in thinking you, as well as working for studios, you have developed your own IP as well. So, what attracts you to a story? What attracts you to some IP that you think, wow, I want to be involved in this. I think this would make a great story.
I mean, I think I guess the history of the IP stuff that I've ended up doing has always been because it's been meaningful in some way. Like, I think the idea of just like making another commercial thing that you're like, we're going to make this because it's going to be a franchise that's then going to do this. It's like, there's enough of those things out there, I think. Like, and you know, as soon as you're trying to make something that's replicating Marvel or Turtles or Despicable Me or anything like that, you're just becoming a copycat of whatever that is. And you're immediately like in that world. And I think it's really, really hard to compete in that space. But I think, like, for me personally, what I want to try and do is be able to crack the code of making something that is a great story and has all of the things that those bigger commercial movies have as far as entertainment value and all of that stuff. But behind it is a message that's meaningful to us now, not something that was created in the 80s or 90s or 70s that is then just being recreated again and recreated again. You know, I think, like, I do believe that my generation of filmmakers deserve the chance to tell the stories that are relevant to them. And I want to try and make that possible at some point in my career, you know, and I say that having made, you know, various franchise movies. And I love making franchise movies, and it's been a huge part of my growth, and it's been a huge, amazing opportunity for me to, especially to do some of the franchises I loved so much as a kid, and to introduce kids to that, reintroduce kids to Turtles has been amazing for me. But in terms of what my personal passionate projects are, I think it's more trying to find stuff like that can, once again, similar to Ozzy, be connected into charities that are doing great work. Because, you know, the kids that we are making content for, you know, it's not their kids anymore. It's not their grandchildren anymore. It's them. Like, when we're talking about environmental messages, it's not anybody else. We're talking directly to the kids that will experience climate change in a way that's different, right? So, as somebody with a 4-year-old, that means a lot to me, and I would love to be able to communicate with her generation in a way that's not preachy, not, you know, I was of the generation where I was sat down at the age of, you know, 12 and told climate change is coming. It's your job to fix it. And it's like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean it's my job? Why is it my job? Shouldn't it be your job? Like, you're the guys who made the mess. Like, why do I have to do it? And I really don't want to. I want to make movies that don't make it their responsibility to solve the problem, but just so that they understand what is coming in a way that's not, you know, intimidating or stressful or anxiety ridden, but like just the truth. And I think as a filmmaker, like, I guess, you know, if art is a mirror of society, I feel like our art should still be that, and we should be creating stories that are relevant to the world that we live in now, you know?
Yeah, you said earlier on when we were talking about Jaws and going back into the water, you said, it's quite interesting, you said, you know, your fear can become your obsession.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I guess that's still the case.
Nothing's changed since Jaws on that island.
There you go. Thank you, Steven Spielberg.
Oh, he's a good teacher. Animated TV series production suffered quite a bit recently as the market's narrowed. I mean, the expectation is that it's going to recover. But at the same time, there seems to be more of a desire, more of a need for features. Why do you think that is?
I think it's interesting because I think that for a long time, you know, a lot of the animation industry is built from merchandise and like the sort of ancillary products that you get from making an animated show. And for a long time, linear TV drove the merchandising game because it was always on TV. So people were like, oh, the more you watch it, the more you're likely you are to go buy the t-shirt or buy the hat or buy the toy or whatever. Like, that was kind of a thing that used to happen. And, you know, I have no real knowledge or experience in this field, but like, you know, I would say like maybe now like the transition is because linear TV's viewing figures are not what they used to be. Maybe now theatrical releases can drive that in a different way because of the amount of marketing that goes on around a theatrical release. I know certainly with Paw Patrol, obviously that has been a very successful linear show for a long time. But when we made the first movie, like that was a big step and that changed the thing. And I think it kept the franchise for even the older kids, as well as being a good trigger point to introduce younger kids to the franchise. So I think also during the streaming, boom and everything, there was a lot of people trying to make like the Game of Thrones of series, and really a lot of people were chasing like making a huge thing. And like obviously there's been great shows to come out of that, like Mayhem the 3 or like Blue-Eyed Samurai, like some of these really ambitious series, which is great. But I think a lot of those shows became very, very costly because trying to do feature quality over 200 minutes, 300 minutes is very, very challenging to do at a price point that makes sense. So, I think a part of it is that, but in general, I think the industry is just going through a transition right now, and as it does, and then I'm sure it will come back.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's certainly what I'm hearing in sort of various conferences and markets is, in terms of TV, they're going to need new content soon. And there's a bit of a shakedown, but over the next sort of 6, 9, 12 months, things will start to ramp up again. And, you mentioned earlier on about, tax credits here in the UK, and we've got the new AVEC, and you've mentioned the new independent film tax credit, or super AVEC as it's now called, which, just before Parliament was dissolved for the election, it passed its first stage and going into legislation, and the new government is very supportive of the creative industries here in the UK. So I don't think that's going to fall by the wayside, and that's going to go through into legislation pretty soon. If you could make any changes to the Super AVEC, the IFTC, what would you do?
Well, I think the Super AVEC right now, from what I understand, is only for films. That's the 40% thing, right? The Super AVEC, right? Yeah. So I think that's only for films with budgets of £15 million. Is that correct? Yeah. And I think to make an independent animated movie for £15 million that can be theatrical and meaningful is an incredibly hard task. Making something for 25, making something for 30 is a much more realistic target, I would say, in many ways. And I'm not saying this from somebody who hasn't made movies at that price or lower. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that from somebody who has. And I think like the biggest thing I would change is just to convert that from being with budgets of 15 to making it up for the first 15 million spent in the UK, you would get that tax credit. And then anything above 15 million would then be transitioned into something else, because any vendor work that is happening in the UK, for example, like the overall budget of the movie will be way higher than that. You wouldn't spend 15 million of vendor money in the UK unless your budget was substantially more than that. You know what I mean? And so none of those projects would be captured within the tax credit here. And because Montreal is currently downgrading their tax credit globally, there is a lot of people figuring out, where am I going to put the work? Where's the smartest place to put the work that used to be in Montreal? Do I keep it in Montreal? Do I move it to India? Do I move it to Australia? Do I move it to the UK? Do I move it to France? And by doing it with your first 15 million, immediately those bigger movies are going to create more jobs within the UK. Like, I think that would be almost a certainty. And it's not to say there aren't already projects with money flowing through the UK, but if that were to change, the amount they would spend here would increase, I would say, for sure. So it's one of those things that, like, just with a very simple term change, I think the amount of job creation you could have, and I think job creation is the key to the training, is the key to the mentorship, is the key to the pipeline, is the key to all of the things that we want to have. And the whole point of a tax credit is job creation. So I think, like, as much as it's great to be able to support these independent movies. And look, it's still very beneficial for anybody who wants to make a $15 million movie. They still get full access to that, but I'm just saying, if your budget is 20 million pounds, for you not to be able to get 50 and 40% on your first 15 million would be devastating. Like, that makes a huge difference in the quality of the film you can make. So that would be my biggest comment if I got to speak to anybody involved in that, because I do think that having been a part of globally planning a vendor studio and seeing where you equate costs to where you put the work, immediately job creation it happens when that tax credit includes it, and there's so much opportunity there for people to take advantage of that and create amazing sustainable industry here.
Well, if I was the Minister for Digital Media, Culture and Sport, I'd do it for you.
Right. Well, thanks. When are you running? When's your campaign?
In about 10 minutes. This is we're winding up now. You've had an incredible career in features, and looking back, I wanted to ask you just 3 final questions. First one is, what do you think the best piece of advice is that you have ever been given?
I should have thought about this one before. There is. I've just been so fortunate to have, obviously I talked about Max being my first mentor, but like, as I've gone into different companies, I've then had different mentors and different roles support me and help me grow and give me opportunities. But, I guess probably my number one mentor would be my partner, Daisy, and she just tells me to be kind. And I think that's probably it. Like, I think there's a thing about kindness to people that, the film business has a reputation for being various things. And especially film producers have a reputation for being various things. But like, just being kind to people and treating people in a kind way and approaching problems in a kind way and problem solving in a kind way is probably like the best thing. Because coming out of the most important thing at the end of any movie that I worked on was that at the end of this film, I want everybody on this movie to want to make another movie with me. Wow. And that is very hard because films can be very stressful. But if you do that, you then get the next job, and then you come out and you make the next job. And when I got Turtles, it was like the number one challenge, because I was like, oh, I'm like in charge of the movie. I'm one of the key people in charge of the movie. And if I can convince all of these people to make another movie with me at the end, then we've got a great team for the sequel. And we managed to create an environment within the film that was very kind and positive and supportive of the artists in a way that we had like 97% talent retention coming back for the sequel. And not many big movies get that from one movie to the next, especially when the film was as challenging to make as Turtles was. So like, that's a really helpful tool when going into any situation, to just think like, okay, before I go into this, like, how can I be kind in this meeting? Like, what is the thing? And of course it's stressful and sometimes that's difficult to be, but that's like the North Star, I guess.
Okay, that. Be kind. That's a really, really good piece of advice. And what advice would you have given yourself at the start of your career, knowing what you know now? And subsequent question to that being, would you encourage someone to enter the industry right now?
I would probably tell myself to be kind. I guess would be the advice. Be kind to people, but be kind to yourself as well. Like, it's a stressful thing, and sometimes you can get frustrated, especially because you have this vision, and the film industry is very easy to sort of like get idealistic about, because when you're younger, you're like, I always had this thing where I was like, I'm going to win an Oscar by the time I'm 30. Like, that was my thing. And I would say that to people, and people would be like, okay, sure, whatever, kid, like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And of course, I didn't win an Oscar by the time I was 30, but because I had this sort of like goal that I set myself, I was just like that was my thing. And when the realization that wasn't going to happen for me when I was probably like 25, 26 was a pretty dark moment, which sounds crazy, but genuinely there was a part of me that had been a big motivator to get me through some of the harder times, that realizing like, oh, I'm not going to get the opportunity to make the movie that is going to do that in any way. Is hard, because you always have this vision of what you want to be, but being able to like get through those hard times and push through and stay motivated. And then one day you wake, if you're in the right place for long enough, it's the right time. And you wake up to a text message that says, do you want in? And I got that text message because I'd interacted with people, I'd engaged with them. They knew I was motivated. They knew I was ambitious, and they ultimately knew I was kind. So, it's like, those are the things that helped me get there. And in terms of people joining the business, I think if your passion is movies, then absolutely you need to do that. Like, don't go do something else. If you want to make movies, you have to go and make movies, and you shouldn't settle for anything less than that. But you have to be prepared for what that means, like the sacrifices you're going to make, and personally, family-wise, socially, to do that. Like, it's not an easy gig. Like, you get to walk out, and when you're with your friends, say, I make movies, but at the same time, you're going to have to call your friends a lot and say, I can't go out tonight because I'm making a movie. Like, that comes with its give and take. And like, even now, the sacrifices I make to do Turtles is I have to spend a lot of time away from my family to do that, and so it never relents. You're always having to make a sacrifice. But if you love movies and you love storytelling and it's something you want to do, then you got to do it, because otherwise you're not going to be happy. It's like, that's the other thing. You might not be happy doing it, but you certainly will not be happy not doing it. You'll always think, what if I had just stuck to that? And I think at the various moments, luckily for me, I did stop and I went to job interviews. And I remember I was in a job interview for a advertising buying company, because I was like, I can talk enough rubbish that I could probably work in marketing in some role. Like, I didn't know anything about marketing, but I was like, whatever, I can talk. And I went to an interview, and the guy sat there, and I got to the final two of some business that I didn't know anything about. And he said, I don't know whether to offer you the job or to just give you a desk and let you do what you want to do, because you don't seem like the type of person that's going to actually quit what you want to do. And talk about advice. That rejection was probably one of the best things that happened to me, because I got a job in the movie industry a couple of weeks later. And had I taken that, I probably wouldn't have. So it's a weird game, but if you want to do it, you got to do it.
Sure. No, I can't disagree with that. And the most important question, I guess, that everybody really wants to have the answer to is which Ninja Turtle do you identify most with, and what's your favorite pizza topping?
When I was younger, it was always Mikey. I guess Mikey was always the thing. Our version of Turtles, it's kind of different, I think. I don't know. I think me as probably it's still Mikey. He's very kind in our version of Turtles. He's very empathetic and fun. And yeah, I mean, I guess, I grew up in New York for a period of my life. So like a pepperoni New York slice is an untouchable pizza in any world. So that would be my choice there. But, it's, yeah. Pepperoni New York slice, it's making me hungry now just thinking about it.
Well, I should probably let you go and get a slice of pizza then. Possibly, the thing is, we're recording this in the morning, and you're not going to start work for about, I reckon, 6 hours.
True. Yeah, but I only finished like 6 hours ago, so
Ramsay, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy guy, so really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
Well, there you go. Pepperoni. You can't beat the classics. A huge thank you to Ramsay for taking the time to talk to us, to Julian at Film London for being a fantastic host, to Janet at Liberry Consulting for setting it all up, and to Odie for her awesome editing. Information about Film London can be found at filmlondon.org/animation. Well worth a visit. And once again, a huge thank you to Liberry Consulting for all their support in making this podcast series a reality. check out their industry-related training courses on the Festivus website now. Thanks everyone, and come back soon for more episodes.